Good evening, everyone. I hope you're well. Throughout history, every religion has changed, has evolved over the years, over the centuries. It would be astounding if that did not happen because times change, cultures change, and things happen due to causes and conditions, and people keep these traditions alive and transmit them according to their own best understandings, and then that's what gets passed down to the next generation and so on. And it's been, of course, the same in Buddhism. There are, well, first of all, just the diversity of the kinds of Buddhism, the different schools and groups and teachings out there are a reflection in large part to Buddhism moving into, over the centuries, moving into a new culture and then bringing in the traditions from whatever culture brought it in, and then that combines with the culture it meets and the times that it's in, and new forms evolve. And then those new forms can be the foundation then that moves into other cultures over the centuries and so on. So things grow and evolve and change. It's quite natural. And so that is, of course, happening here in our country as Buddhism it's been around for a while now. It's always been around from immigrants who've come to this country and brought their native forms with them. So those forms of Buddhism have always been here and kept alive, and some of those traditional forms are quite alive in the traditional forms. And there's also those Buddhist forms that have been brought back. Some native Westerners have gone to traditional Buddhist countries, practiced and brought those teachings back, the practices, the traditions back. And then, just as has happened time and again, they've met and connected with, our time, our culture. And so we have new forms that are developing. And even among those of us who aren't directly connected, we're not immigrants from some of the Buddhist countries, traditional Buddhist countries. Some of us connect with and hold to traditional forms, and for others of us, we welcome the new forms and we can relate to them more, and it brings them more alive for us. And so I'm quite prepared to argue, on one hand, you could say when the form changes, you could argue something's lost. And I'm quite prepared to, if I was in a debate, I could happily take that side of the argument in the debate. And you could argue that something's gained and kept it alive and relevant. And so I could take that side of the debate too. I could see both sides to it. One of the aspects, I think an important aspect in many of the forms that are becoming westernized, Americanized, is the inclusion of Western psychological understandings that you don't really find in, I have to be careful, I can't represent all the cultures, but certainly in Theravada, the tradition I'm most aware of, and if you go back to the source materials, the source texts, and the later commentarial works, it was a different time, different culture. And so you don't find, it would be amazing if you did, you don't find Western psychological aspects being brought in as part of the teachings. And so, but of course it's very alive here. And again, you could argue that it's been detrimental or it's been beneficial. I feel very strongly that on the whole it's been beneficial, but sometimes when people are maybe being a little derogatory, you'll hear people say things such as, well, the Dharma is being watered down and it's losing its historical roots or message about enlightenment and liberation, and it's becoming another form of psychological healing, which and I don't know if people think that's a bad thing, but that it's become watered down in a sense. People will say that. I don't feel that that's true. I wanted to talk about that a little bit. The So I'll give you an example of why I think it's actually been quite detrimental. One of the core teachings is whether, depending on whether you're in Theravada or some of the Mahayana traditions, there'll be the teachings on emptiness, which is in the early schools of Buddhism, but it really, and it is talked about, but it's more fully developed and comes to prominence more in the Mahayana traditions. I think the same concept of emptiness is conveyed more directly or overtly in Theravada by concepts such as impermanence and no self, which I think are getting to the same, to me, they're getting kind of to the same essence there. So, and people will sometimes ask, well, how does that make sense? If, for example, you take no self, which we've talked about here, I won't go back and redo that unless you want to when we open it up for discussion. I'm happy to, but this idea of no self, which is not it's an inaccurate translation of, in Pali, anatta, in Sanskrit, anatman. Really just means, I'll say a little bit, it really means no atman, or no in Pali, atta. And so it doesn't mean you don't have a self in the conventional sense. But we say no self and people will ask, well, wait a minute, if there's no self, then why do we want to, in psychology, we want to create a healthy sense of self? Who doesn't want to have a healthy sense of self? Nobody would want to have an unhealthy sense of self. I think we could all agree to that. And so, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. How does that fit in? Well, if you think about, just using this example, if you think about what it means, often if we say maybe to not have a healthy sense of self, it's a vague term, and it can take many, many forms. I'm thinking back to my youth when I struggled around issues of self-esteem. And that term itself, self-esteem, it's not just one thing, it's not just one way. So I won't get into all the details of my own manifestation of it, but it was a very powerful place in me that was, and I really despaired if I would ever be able to really get out from under the grips of it. It was quite emotionally crippling in my early days. And as I look back, it was years later when I just realized that it wasn't operative for me anymore. And I don't know if a person if you've had certain psychological, this term wounding, or certain difficult areas, let's say, if you can become as free and liberated as if you never had that particular issue at all. I don't know the answer to that. But certainly we can become very liberated and freed up, and a lot of these things tend to kind of evaporate away, and through maybe just living and the wisdom of getting older and having life experience. For me, definitely I had my share of psychotherapy, which I have found very helpful, but I really, I can't say for sure because it's sort of a culmination of everything in life, but I give a lot of the credit to meditation practice itself. And sitting and being with myself, cultivating, these states of samadhi and mindfulness and insight and the heart practices, that has a quality, a power we call purification of mind, which starts to rearrange and disentangle unhealthy, unwholesome, or we would call patterns in the mind that create difficulty and suffering. They tend to let go and disentangle. That's a healing. We would call that creating a healthier sense of self in traditional Western psychological language. So that's an example of something that was very powerful for me. And it was years later when I looked back and realized, well, wow, this used to be a dominant area of suffering in my life, and I haven't thought about it in decades. What happened? I didn't even notice that over time it had just liberated, and it gladdened my mind tremendously when I could look back and see the fruits of the practice in such a powerful way, given how much I struggled around those issues and some other psychological issues too. And they're just pretty much not operative for me anymore. And it's been, as I think back, it's a real blessing, and I'm quite thankful. I'm not saying I have no struggles or never suffering. We're all human beings, of course, but it's been a tremendous healing. So yes, you could say that was creating a healthier sense of self, but I don't know that we have to. If and I'm perfectly fine with using that way of speaking about it, but you don't have to. You don't have, when you heal up wounded or difficult places, it doesn't mean you have to create this new thing that we call the healthy sense of self just by healing up the difficult places. So using the example I gave of around self-esteem, well, I think back, and it was definitely, the experiences would be places of very strong senses of self, strong identities that happened to be very negative, and hampered my ability to function well, and hampered my ability to have peace of mind or to be happy. But there were very, very strong places of getting right to what really the heart of Buddhist practice is, of letting go of the clinging or the entanglement around self, which is really what the teachings on non-self and impermanence are about. It's not that you don't have a self, it's about letting go of the clinging, the attachment, it having to be some set, fixed way, when of course it's all changing. If it wasn't changing, there would have been no hope, say, in my case, of moving from that's the suffering of those psychological issues to a place of that was, we'll just say, a lot better, a lot freer. You may want to look back into your own life, and I don't know, hopefully you didn't have, really, really strong difficulties as I did, but we all have, I call it, that we all have, the way I say it is, we all have our top 10 tunes. And the main ways that we each tend to, our minds create suffering, whatever those patterns are for all of us. And of course, most of us, probably no one's coming up with anything brand new that's not shared by many, many people, but we all have our own combination. And unless you happen to share some in common with me, you'll have yours, I'll have mine, probably have lots of overlap if we were to share. So we all have our main ways that we can get into difficulty. We fall into clinging, identity, contracting and concretizing or constricting around some fixed identity. And in the case of the examples I'm using, when that happens around a negative sense or an unwholesome or an unhelpful, a suffering sense of ourselves, well, as I said, it creates suffering. It's a suffering generator, and it's generally not an accurate view about ourselves. When I was dealing with my own self-esteem issues, I was a teenager and in my early 20s, my view of myself was filtered through the perception of the psychological issue, but I couldn't even see that because it feels real. And so I couldn't really see myself objectively, but even if you don't have enough awareness, you may not even know that's going on. If you can have enough awareness that's going on, that's already a huge, big, tremendous leap, tremendous step towards healing, right? Because part of the ways we get disentangled from things is, one is whatever it is can happen, can arise in our awareness, but we see it and we know it. And that gives us an opportunity, even though it can be strong and can be challenging when it's there, but gives us a chance to not have to be at the effect of it. Another way it heals up is that they just don't arise. Or when they do arise, it's a much lighter touch. So there's these different ways it can come, but certainly just the awareness of knowing what's happening can take us very, very far. Both in an important part in not getting reactive out of that feeling in the moment, but also just shining the light of awareness is a tremendous healing force. Even if we don't always notice it right in the moment, or you may be despairing that you're after all these years of practice, for those of you who've been doing this for a while, and this particular issue seems to be hanging on and on and on, and it can be like that and feel that way. But we have to take the larger view and have patience and just continue on with self-empathy, kindness, care, compassion, the same love we would want to give to someone we cared about greatly. We would want to bring that love to ourselves, and then to hold ourselves with some patience and know that we're all doing the best we can. And it's a cliche we often say, you know, that but you cannot. You literally, by definition, can't do. You can't do better than you can do. So, but actually, it would serve us well to remember that, and that can help us know we're doing our best. Let that gladden our minds to know, well, I am trying my best, and not judge it by our view about how the outcome is supposed to look. So the psychological piece can be very powerful, even in the service of Dharma goals. As I said, when we're caught in some our psychological issues, if we and we've really created a what we call traditional language unwholesome, let's just say a painful, a suffering generating identity that's not even accurate. I mean, it is the accurate experience that's happening, of course, but the story we tell ourselves, what we make it, I mean, we don't know if it's accurate or not because our perception is colored by what's going on. If we start to heal those up, as I started to say earlier, we don't have to create some other identity necessarily. We just heal up the places that are most identified in a negative way. And then the question is, what happens when that lets go? We stop creating those identities and don't necessarily have to create another identity. And then we actually, for many people, I found for myself, am much more able to be present with myself in a more relaxed way. And I found to hold all the aspects of myself with some amount of discernment and wisdom. We all have our blind spots, of course. But we see more clearly, and we can relax around it all. And even the difficult places, or whatever, however you want to call it, the broken places, if that's appropriate. It's okay. We can hold those with some kindness, and it shifts our relationship with it. And we don't create an identity. We just see it's arising, it's passing away. It's real experience. It's part of what makes us up for sure, but it's also just a conditioned phenomena. And it has truth, it has meaning, it's important, but in a conditioned sense. And so, just as we can fall out of balance if we're too identified, as I was just saying, and hooked into or caught up in these negative senses of ourselves, we also don't want to get out of balance and go too far the other way and not invalidate what's going on in our psychology. Because yes, it's all just conditioned patterns. It's arising, passing away in the traditional view. I remember times when I was younger. I'm thinking about it, this must have happened many times, but I'm thinking about a time on retreat in particular when I was really suffering with whatever in my mind was going on. And I remember saying to myself, you know, in a month, a year, you're not even going to remember this. And it's true. I don't even remember what I was suffering about. I do remember the incident that there was some difficulty, and I told myself that I'm not going to remember it, but that's all. And so things that can feel so real and powerful and important, then maybe not that much later, we don't even remember them. Sometimes we do remember things, I understand that. But sometimes, how important was it? So there's a balance here. We want to keep things in perspective on our psychology, that, um, it's just patterns coming up. My self-esteem is an example. I have some ideas how those patterns got programmed in my mind from my childhood, but I don't really see the whole picture. Somehow, in a combination of who I was, my upbringing, the experience as a child, maybe I came into this world with certain kind of preconditioning. I don't really know, but the mind got programmed some way. And an example I often use is seeing these difficulties like a computer program. If you're running you've got a little icon on your desktop of your computer and you click on it, and whatever program it is, it's going to run that program. Maybe it's a computer game or it's a word processing, Microsoft Word or Excel, or it opens up your web browser. It's a program, and when you click on it, it only knows how to do one thing. When you click on the icon for Microsoft Word, you're never going to get an Excel spreadsheet. It's never going to happen. The patterns, your top 10 tunes, are exactly the same way. They're little programs that are in the mind. And when whatever causes and conditions come that click those programs off, that trigger those patterns, it's just going to do what it does. So that's what we mean by the impersonal nature. It's personal because it's your top 10 tune. It's not mine, unless we happen to share them in common. So yes, it's personal, but it has an impersonal quality. It's just a little program that spins out, right? I guess using that analogy, part of maybe what all these practices are about is learning to take the difficult programming and either get it to the trash bin or move it over way over to the side so it doesn't get clicked on so much anymore, something like that. And maybe when your operating system gets upgraded 2 or 3 or 4 upgrades down the road, the old pattern's not even compatible anymore. That's a good analogy. I should remember that. It won't even run anymore on the new operating system. That's actually a nice way to think about it. It's kind of like that. It really is. I've never thought of it like that before. So yes, they're impersonal. They're impermanent. It's just stuff that happens in the mind, right? We want to hold that perspective so we don't take it more seriously than it deserves. And yet at the same time, those things are important. They're kind of not important, but they're important at the same time. We don't want to be dismissive. We need to pause and hang out and say, well, wait a minute. Is that just an old pattern that's not connected to anything? There's nothing to learn from it, and we just let it go? There's a lot of times like that. Or is this a time to wait, let me hang out here. There's something important here. Yes, it's a conditioned pattern. Yes, it's just that program that runs, but it keeps running, and when it does, I keep getting identified and hooked in it. Then we need to take it really seriously because it's there to teach us. It's telling us something. It's showing us that this is a place that needs tending to. So in that sense, I hope we'll want to take them seriously. And then, what needs to be done, what would be useful and helpful for us to work with these things, to heal them, to disentangle. That's a big topic, and it's highly individual, right? So I don't have much time anyway, but I wouldn't want to just be glib and throw out some generic platitudes of do this and that. It depends on each of us what our path forward is. So just a couple things I've mentioned. That, like for me, I found in my particular issues, some psychotherapy helped. Particular kinds of psychotherapy was very helpful. That may not be the way for everyone. I found that the Dharma and meditation practice was powerfully healing. So that's another, so we find our own way with it all. So this place of, it gets back to what I kind of started with, of the idea of something gained and something lost. You could argue as Dharma, you could say Buddhism or Dharma is coming here into the West and taking some of the newer forms that are coming. Well, we know that psychological healing, that's the example of one of the innovations that's coming here in the West, is not in and of itself liberating in the sense that the Dharma is pointing to. But but it can be very, very powerful in whatever way you hold it. I'm a big believer in those kind of therapies and in psychological insights and understanding. In whatever way people use it and apply them, it's not for me or for any of us to say. We each find our own way. But certainly within the context of the Dharma, it can be another valuable tool of letting go of going right back to the old traditional teachings of liberating us from clinging.